when the founders wrote the Constitution, they did not anticipate a party system, in particular a unitary party system, where the same institution, the same organization, elects candidates for local, state, and federal office. They nominate candidates for the executive branch, they nominate them for the legislative branch. In some states, they even nominate them for the judicial branch. And so this is an end run around the founder's safeguard of separation of powers. Why do you think they had the powers divided between the federal government and the state and local governments? Why do you think they had powers divided between the judicial, the legislative, and the executive branches? They divided them because they didn't want too much power to accumulate in any one place. One of the founders said that's the very definition of tyranny, is when all power is gathered into the same set of hands. Well, what is a political party system then? Isn't all power gathered into the same set of hands when your local candidates, your state candidates, and your federal candidates are all members of the same club? They all have the same boss. They're all working their way up the same organization. Isn't it all power being gathered into one set of hands when your executive branch candidates and your legislative branch candidates are all from the same club? They're all working up the same hierarchy, and sometimes it even applies to the judicial candidates. So the founders did not anticipate us, and even though it happened very quickly, but it caught them by surprise. They very carefully arranged for separation of powers because they knew that power corrupts. And what does the unitary party system do? Is it get exactly what they were trying to fight. It gathers all power into the same set of hands, all in the same place. It makes a farce of the so-called separation of powers between the states and the federal government. It makes a farce of the separation of powers between the executive branch and the legislative branch. How often do you see, when there's a legislative majority and a chief executive from the same party, that they just roll over and they don't even need constituents anymore? They just vote in the plan that the titular head of their party advances. So in order to fix it, in order to return to the founder's intent and enable separation of powers to work, you don't need to have the ambitious young politician working their way up through the local, then to the state, and he has his eye on the federal, and he stays in the same club the whole time. That's not the way it should work. Each state should have its parties and elect its state candidates. Then maybe there could be federal parties. They have federal candidates. Maybe should just be a lot of independents in the legislature. That would be the best, because then they'd answer only their constituents and not their party bosses in Washington, D.C. So maybe you have parties for president that are national. Maybe you have independents in your legislative branch. Maybe you have a different party that elects your executive on the state level, but you have independents in the state legislature too. Or you have 10 parties. 10 parties would be better than 2. It shouldn't be, if there were 10 parties, it would be the same as breaking up this end run by which they've short-circuited the checks and balances that were built into our government. But the way it stands now, if you are pushing for your party to win everything, you are pushing for corrupt government, because one-party systems, history teaches this, invariably go corrupt. This time won't be any different. If you want to change it, you should push for diversity in political representation. Not all coming from one club, especially not one club headquartered in Washington and funded by global, not even American corporations buying these elections these days. Thank you for listening.